Sometimes the most valuable thing a person carries isn't worth a single dollar to anyone else, until the day its story is finally told. The boarding area buzzed with the familiar rhythm of a cross-country flight. Business travelers hurried toward their gates while families gathered near the windows, watching aircraft prepare for departure. Amid the crowd walked a man almost everyone noticed, but not for the reason they would remember later. Walter Hayes was 78. His shoulders were slightly bent with age, a weathered navy cap rested neatly over his silver hair, and in both hands he carried a small wooden box pressed carefully against his chest. It wasn't polished or ornate. Time had softened its edges and darkened the grain, making it look almost ordinary. Yet Walter held it with a quiet devotion, as though letting go, even for a moment, was simply not an option. When boarding began, he waited patiently near the end of the line. He never rushed anymore. Some journeys had taught him that arriving a little later rarely changed where life intended to take you. Claire Morgan stood at the aircraft door greeting passengers with the warm smile she had perfected over years of flying. As Walter stepped aboard, her eyes naturally settled on the little wooden box. "Good afternoon, sir," she said kindly. "May I help you place that in the overhead compartment?" Walter looked up and returned her smile. "Thank you," he replied softly, "but it stays with me." There was no irritation in his voice, no defensiveness, only quiet certainty. Claire nodded without another question. "Of course, sir. Right this way." As Walter made his way to row 18, several passengers glanced at the box before returning to their phones. To most of them, it looked like nothing more than an old wooden keepsake carried by an elderly man who refused to let go. Once seated beside the window, Walter rested the box gently on his lap, one hand never leaving its worn lid. A little boy across the aisle tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, what's in the box?" Without looking up from fastening her seatbelt, she answered with a faint smile. "Probably nothing important, sweetheart." Walter heard every word. For the briefest moment, his weathered face remained perfectly still. Then a gentle smile appeared, so small that only Claire noticed it as she continued helping passengers settle into their seats. Walter didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply rested his hand on the wooden box, as if greeting an old friend who no longer needed introductions. To everyone else on that airplane, it was just an old box. If only they knew, it held everything he had left. The aircraft climbed steadily above a blanket of white clouds, leaving the city far below until highways became thin gray lines and rivers shimmered like ribbons beneath the afternoon sun. Inside the cabin, conversations faded into the soft hum of the engines. A few passengers opened laptops. Others leaned back with closed eyes, surrendering to the quiet rhythm of the flight. Walter Hayes remained exactly as Claire had first seen him, sitting upright by the window with the little wooden box resting gently across his knees. He never glanced at the entertainment screen. He never reached for a magazine. Every few minutes, his fingertips brushed the smooth lid almost absent-mindedly, like someone reassuring himself that an old promise was still there. Claire noticed without staring. Years of flying had taught her the difference between curiosity and compassion. Some stories arrived only when they were ready to be heard. Nearly an hour into the flight, the seatbelt sign illuminated with a familiar chime. The captain calmly announced that they would be passing through a patch of moderate turbulence and asked everyone to remain seated. The airplane trembled softly at first, then dipped just enough for several passengers to gasp before settling again. Plastic cups rattled against tray tables. Overhead bins creaked gently. Walter instinctively tightened his arms around the wooden box, but one unexpected jolt shifted it from his lap. Time seemed to slow as the box slipped toward the aisle. Claire was already walking nearby when she saw it happen. Walter reached down at the very same moment she did. Their hands stopped just inches apart as the lid loosened and quietly opened. Neither of them spoke. Inside rested objects that seemed impossibly ordinary at first glance. A carefully folded American flag no larger than 2 hands. A weathered pair of silver pilot wings whose shine had long faded. Several black and white photographs with softened corners. A military medal nestled inside worn blue velvet. And resting beside them was a small wooden toy airplane, hand-carved with uneven wings and tiny painted windows, the kind only a child would treasure. Claire did not pick up a single item without permission. She simply steadied the open box while Walter carefully lifted each keepsake with hands that trembled only because of age, not fear. He placed the photographs back first, then the little airplane, then the wings. Finally, he rested the medal inside as though returning it to its rightful place after a long journey. Claire gently closed the lid before offering the box back to him with both hands. Walter accepted it with quiet gratitude. Their eyes met for only a second. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice almost lost beneath the steady sound of the engines. Claire smiled softly. "You are very welcome, sir." She returned to her duties without asking what any of the objects meant. She did not ask about the medal. She did not ask about the photographs. She did not ask why a simple wooden toy occupied the same sacred space as military honors. Somehow she understood that questions could wait, but respect could not. Walter looked down at the closed box for a long moment before resting one hand across its lid again. Around him, the passengers returned to their movies, books, and conversations, unaware they had just witnessed a lifetime compressed into a space no larger than a shoebox. Claire glanced back once from the galley. The old man had turned toward the window again, watching endless clouds drift beneath the wings of the airplane, while the little wooden box remained exactly where it had always belonged, close enough for him to hear the echoes of a life no one else on board could yet imagine. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as lunch trays disappeared one by one, replaced by quiet conversations and the occasional rustle of blankets. Beyond the oval window, the afternoon sun painted endless clouds with soft shades of gold. Walter Hayes had barely touched his meal. The cup of coffee beside him had gone cold, but he did not seem to notice. His attention rested on the wooden box, his fingers tracing its worn edges with the familiarity of someone reading a story he already knew by heart. Claire walked down the aisle carrying a fresh pot of hot tea. When she reached row 18, she paused with a gentle smile. "Would you like some hot tea instead, sir?" Walter looked up as though returning from a place far away. "I would appreciate that. Thank you." Claire carefully filled the paper cup. The warm steam drifted upward between them before she quietly turned to continue her service. "Mississippi." His voice stopped her. She looked back. Walter rested one hand upon the wooden box before speaking again. "That medal is not mine." Claire remained silent. She sensed he was not asking a question. He was finally opening a door that had remained closed for decades. Walter lowered his eyes toward the box. "It was given to my wife." The words lingered between them, almost too gentle to carry the weight behind them. Claire slowly took the empty jump seat across the aisle after making certain every passenger nearby was comfortable. She did not interrupt. Walter continued speaking, not because someone had asked, but because after so many years, the story had finally found someone willing to simply listen. "They believed I never came home." His gaze drifted toward the clouds outside the window. "My aircraft went down during a combat mission overseas. Communication was lost. Search teams could not find us. After several weeks." He paused, taking a slow breath. "The military declared me killed in action." Claire glanced toward the closed wooden box. Suddenly, the medal inside no longer looked like an award. It looked like unfinished grief. Walter's voice remained calm, almost detached, as though he had repeated these facts only inside his own mind for many years. There was a ceremony. My wife stood where I should have been standing. She accepted the Medal of Honor on behalf of a husband everyone believed had given everything. His eyes softened with quiet sorrow rather than regret. The newspapers printed my photograph. My hometown held a memorial service. Flags flew at half-staff. My little girl was too young to understand why everyone kept calling her father a hero. Claire felt a lump rise quietly in her throat, but she said nothing. Walter smiled faintly, though it never reached his eyes. Funny thing about history. Once it decides your story has ended, very few people ever wonder if another chapter exists. The engines hummed steadily around them, while dozens of passengers remained unaware that one row behind them sat a man the world had honored only after believing he was gone forever. Walter gently lifted the cup of tea Claire had poured and held it between both hands, welcoming the warmth more than the drink itself. "People thank me for my service sometimes," he said softly. "They never realize they are speaking to a ghost who came home too late." Claire looked at him with quiet respect, not pity. There was a difference. She finally understood why the medal rested beside family photographs instead of hanging proudly on a wall. It had never represented victory. It represented everything that had been taken while one man was still struggling to find his way back to a life that had already learned to continue without him. Claire remained seated for another quiet moment, careful not to disturb the silence that had settled between them. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It felt like the kind that only appeared after someone finally spoke a truth they had carried alone for far too long. Walter watched the clouds drift beyond the window before speaking again, his voice softer now, almost as if he were remembering each word instead of choosing it. "I did not die that day." He smiled faintly, at least not in the way everyone believed. His eyes remained fixed on the endless sky outside. "I survived after leaving the aircraft, but when I finally woke up, I did not know my own name." Claire listened without moving. Walter continued, "A small mountain village found me. They did not know who I was. Neither did I." There was no bitterness in his voice, only quiet acceptance. "I could not remember my family. I could not remember flying. I could not even remember the country I had come from." He rested both hands around the warm cup Claire had brought him. "The doctors called it traumatic memory loss. They said memories sometimes return slowly. Sometimes they never return at all." He paused as another passenger walked past toward the restroom before continuing in little more than a whisper. "Days became months. Months became years. I worked where I could, fixed fences, carried supplies, helped farmers repair old machinery. Every morning, I looked into a mirror, hoping the man looking back would finally introduce himself." Claire could almost picture the lonely years passing one season after another, while an entire life remained hidden behind a locked door inside his mind. Walter closed his eyes for a brief moment, but one memory refused to disappear. His expression softened in a way Claire had not seen before. A little girl's laughter. He smiled, this time with genuine warmth. I could never see her face. I only remembered the sound. Bright, carefree, like tiny bells carried by the wind. He let out a slow breath. That sound followed me everywhere. I did not know who she was. I only knew she mattered more than anything else. The engines hummed steadily overhead as Walter's words blended almost naturally with the rhythm of the flight. Nearly 5 years passed before everything changed. His fingers tightened gently around the cup. Little by little, memories rushed back after hearing a familiar military march on a small radio inside a repair shop. Something inside me simply unlocked. His eyes widened ever so slightly, as though reliving the moment itself. My name came back first, then my squadron, then my wife, then my daughter. His voice caught for only an instant before steadying again. Every forgotten face returned all at once, like lights coming back after a long blackout. Claire saw tears gathering quietly in the corners of his eyes, but they never fell. Walter simply smiled toward the clouds. I packed everything I owned into one bag the very next morning. He glanced down at the wooden box resting safely against his knees. There was only one place I wanted to go. For the first time since hearing his story began, Claire allowed herself to believe that fate had finally shown mercy. After years without a name, without a past, without a family, surely this was the beginning of the ending Walter deserved. Surely somewhere beyond the clouds, a wife and daughter were still waiting for the man they had never stopped loving. Walter looked out the window once more, and although he did not say another word, the quiet sadness in his eyes hinted that coming home would prove far more difficult than remembering the way back. Walter fell silent for several moments. Claire did not interrupt. Outside the window, the sun had begun its slow descent, washing the clouds in soft amber light that made the sky look almost peaceful enough to erase the passage of time. But some years refused to disappear. They remained waiting at the end of every memory. Walter finally spoke again, his voice steady, though somehow quieter than before. I drove straight to the house. A faint smile appeared for only a heartbeat. I knew every turn before I even saw the street. Funny how the heart remembers places the mind forgets. He looked down at the wooden box resting beneath his hands. The maple tree was still there. His eyes drifted somewhere far beyond the cabin walls. It was taller than I remembered. Claire imagined an old neighborhood frozen inside one man's hope. Walter continued. The porch had been painted. The fence was different. There were flowers my wife never planted. He swallowed gently before speaking again. The front door was locked. There was no anger in his voice, only the quiet exhaustion of someone who had arrived years too late. A neighbor recognized my name before she recognized my face. He paused. She thought she was looking at a ghost. Claire felt her chest tighten. Walter never looked away from the clouds. She told me my wife had never recovered after receiving the telegram. His words came slowly, each one carrying decades of silence. Everyone said she tried to stay strong for our little girl. She smiled whenever people visited. She thanked every officer who came to the house. She even attended the ceremony where they handed her the medal. His fingers rested lightly upon the lid of the wooden box. But grief has a way of continuing after everyone else goes home. He lowered his eyes. She became ill not long afterward. She passed away before I ever remembered how to find my way back. Claire quietly pressed her lips together. Walter continued before sympathy could become words. Our daughter was still very young. He stared at the toy airplane hidden inside the box as though he could see it through the wood itself. With no close family able to care for her, she entered the foster system. Another long pause settled between them. The engines hummed steadily overhead. Somewhere farther back, a child laughed, and for an instant Walter smiled at the familiar sound. Months later, he said softly, a kind couple who had spent years hoping for a child adopted her. Claire felt hope flicker again. At least the little girl had found a family. Walter nodded almost imperceptibly, as though he had heard the same thought inside his own heart years ago. Before I left the neighborhood, the neighbor disappeared into her house and returned carrying this wooden box. He gently placed one hand upon it. My wife had packed everything she wanted our daughter to remember. His voice nearly disappeared. The photographs, my pilot wings, the medal they gave her, letters she had written but never mailed, little keepsakes from our life together. He smiled sadly. She must have believed one day our daughter would be old enough to understand who her father had been. Claire looked at the worn box with entirely different eyes now. It was no longer simply a collection of memories. It was an unfinished promise. Walter closed his eyes for only a moment before whispering, when they handed me the box, they believed they were giving it back to its rightful owner. His fingers tightened gently around the weathered wood. But deep down, I knew it had never truly belonged to me. Walter rested both hands on the wooden box as though it had suddenly become heavier. The cabin around them remained peaceful. A flight attendant in another aisle offered drinks. Someone laughed softly. Several rows behind them. Life continued exactly as it always did, never realizing another person's world had quietly stopped many years before. Claire waited, sensing there was still one chapter Walter had never spoken aloud. He slowly nodded. I found the adoption records. His words were calm, almost matter of fact. It took months, but eventually I found her name, her new address. He smiled gently, though sadness lingered behind his eyes. I drove there the very next morning. His gaze drifted toward the clouds once more. I parked across the street because I did not know what I was supposed to say if she answered the door. He let out a small breath that sounded almost like a laugh. After waiting nearly 5 years to remember my family, I suddenly discovered I was afraid to meet my own daughter. Claire listened without speaking. Walter continued. The front yard was full of toys. A little bicycle leaned against the porch. Then the front door opened. His expression softened in a way Claire had never seen before. A little girl ran outside. He paused before quietly adding, she looked exactly like her mother. His eyes shimmered beneath the cabin lights. A man stepped onto the porch behind her. He lifted her onto his shoulders. She laughed. Walter smiled at the memory. A woman followed a few seconds later. She adjusted the little girl's sweater before kissing the top of her head. Silence settled between them again. Finally, Walter whispered, they looked like a family. He folded his hands together. I asked an elderly neighbor if they were good people. His smile became warmer. She did not hesitate. Walter repeated the answer exactly as he had remembered it for decades. She said, that little girl is the luckiest child in this neighborhood. He looked down at the wooden box. That was all I needed to hear. Claire frowned gently. You did not introduce yourself? Walter slowly shook his head. No. There was no hesitation in his answer. She already had a father. The words hung quietly between them. Not the man who gave her life, Walter continued. The man who stayed. He looked through the window as the late afternoon sunlight stretched across the wing outside. I returned many times after that. Claire remained perfectly still. Walter smiled as memories unfolded one by one. I never followed every moment of her life, Walter said softly. Only the milestones I somehow learned about. He smiled faintly. I watched from far away on her first day of school. I stood across the street when she learned to ride a bicycle. Years later, I watched her graduate. I even smiled when I saw the same man patiently teaching her how to drive. His voice never trembled. It became gentler with every memory. When she married, I stood in the last row of the church. Claire could almost see him there, unnoticed among strangers. Walter continued quietly. I watched her father walk her down the aisle. He paused before adding, "He earned that place. Not me." A long silence followed. Finally, he whispered, "Years later, I saw her holding her first baby outside the hospital." A peaceful smile crossed his face. She looked happy. Claire felt tears gathering in her own eyes. "You were always there," she said almost without thinking. Walter nodded slowly, never looking away from the endless sky beyond the glass. "Yes," he whispered. "She just never knew." Claire remained beside him for another quiet moment before the announcement for the beginning of descent echoed gently through the cabin. Passengers stirred awake. Window shades lifted. Seat backs returned upright. The ordinary rhythm of travel slowly resumed. But something between Claire and Walter had changed forever. She no longer saw an elderly passenger carrying an old wooden box. She saw a father who had spent half a lifetime loving his daughter from a distance she never knew existed. As she prepared the cabin, one question stayed with her until she finally returned to row 18. Walter was looking out at the fading sunlight spilling across the clouds when she spoke softly. "May I ask you something?" He turned with the same calm expression he had carried since boarding. "Of course." Claire hesitated only briefly. "Why are you flying today?" Walter smiled, almost as though he had expected that question all along. Without saying a word, he placed the wooden box carefully onto the tray table and slowly lifted the lid. This time he did not hide its contents. Claire saw the familiar metal, the photographs, the tiny wooden airplane, the silver pilot wings, and beneath them all rested a large cream-colored envelope that had yellowed gently with age. Across the front, written in graceful handwriting, was a woman's first name, Walter's daughter. Claire looked back at him in silence. Walter carefully lifted the envelope with both hands as though it might break if held too tightly. "This," he whispered, "was never mine to keep." He opened the envelope just enough for Claire to glimpse its contents. Inside were neatly folded letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. A few birthday cards, a pressed wildflower, small drawings made by a little girl many years ago. One photograph showed Walter in his flight uniform smiling beside his young wife before the war had taken them in different directions. Another showed his wife holding their daughter as an infant, both laughing into the sunlight. Walter gently closed the envelope again before resting it in his lap. "My wife wrote these letters after I was declared gone." His voice remained steady despite the memories filling every word. "She wrote to our daughter every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone she thought she might miss." He looked down with quiet affection. "She wanted our little girl to know who her father really was, not the name printed beneath a newspaper photograph." Claire felt tears gathering again, but she allowed Walter to continue. "I could have delivered these years ago." He smiled softly. "Instead, I convinced myself I would only interrupt a happy life." He paused before adding, "That was fear pretending to be kindness." The admission seemed to lift something from his shoulders. Walter looked through the cabin window, toward the land slowly appearing beneath the clouds. "She deserves these memories." His fingers rested gently upon the envelope. "She deserves her mother's voice." Claire nodded slowly. She finally understood that this journey had never been about reclaiming the past. It was about returning something precious to the person who had unknowingly waited her entire life for it. Walter carefully placed the envelope back inside the wooden box beside every keepsake that had survived the passing years. Then he closed the lid with quiet certainty. For the first time since Claire had met him, he no longer held the box as though he feared losing it. Instead, he held it like someone finally ready to let it go. The captain's voice came over the speakers with calm confidence, announcing that they had begun their final descent. Outside, the clouds slowly parted, revealing neighborhoods, winding roads, and patches of evening light stretching across the landscape below. Passengers reached for their jackets. Seat belts clicked into place. Window shades lifted as everyone prepared for another ordinary landing. For Walter Hayes, nothing about this arrival felt ordinary. He rested the wooden box gently on his lap and looked through the window without speaking. The reflection staring back at him looked older than he remembered, yet somehow lighter than the man who had boarded the airplane only a few hours earlier. Claire completed one last walk through the cabin before stopping beside his seat. She smiled softly. "Everything all right, sir?" Walter nodded almost absent-mindedly. His eyes never left the view outside. "May I ask you one last question?" Claire said quietly. He turned toward her with the same gentle kindness that had never once disappeared from his face. "Of course." Claire hesitated only briefly before asking the question she knew had been living inside him all day. "Do you think she will be angry?" Walter lowered his eyes to the wooden box. His fingers rested lightly across its lid. For several seconds he said nothing at all. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the certainty that had filled the stories of his past. It carried only the quiet honesty of a father standing before the unknown. "I do not know." He smiled sadly. "She lost a lifetime because of me, even though I never chose to leave." He paused before adding, "Sometimes the truth arrives so late that it feels unfair to everyone." Claire gently shook her head. "I do not think she has been waiting for perfection." Walter looked at her, surprised. Claire smiled with calm conviction. "I think she has been waiting for the truth." Those words settled over Walter more gently than any reassurance could have. He looked down once more before carefully lifting the wooden box into his arms. This time something was different. Since the moment he had boarded the airplane, he had held it with quiet desperation, as though letting go meant losing the last pieces of his family forever. Now his hands remained steady. The fear had slowly given way to purpose. He was no longer protecting the box from the world. He was carrying it toward the person who had always been meant to receive it. The aircraft continued descending through the evening sky. Houses grew larger beneath the wings. Highways filled with tiny streams of headlights. Somewhere among those streets lived a woman who had spent her entire life believing one story about her father. Within the next few hours, that story would quietly change forever. Walter closed his eyes for only a moment and whispered words so softly that only Claire could hear them. "I hope she had a beautiful life." Claire smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. "From everything you told me," she answered gently, "it sounds like she did." Walter nodded with peaceful acceptance. Then perhaps staying away was the right decision. Claire looked at him carefully before replying one final time. "Maybe, but coming today is the right one." Walter breathed in slowly, holding the wooden box against his heart one last time before relaxing his grip. For the first time in decades, he was no longer carrying the weight of the past. He was simply carrying it home. The wheels touched the runway with a gentle shudder before the aircraft rolled beneath the fading evening sky. Around Walter Hayes, passengers hurried to collect their bags, already thinking about the next part of their day. Walter remained seated until the cabin had nearly emptied. The little wooden box rested quietly in his hands, no longer clutched with fear, but carried with quiet purpose. Claire stood beside the aircraft door, thanking each traveler as they stepped into the terminal. When Walter finally reached her, he paused for a moment. "Thank you for listening," he said softly. Claire smiled. "Thank you for trusting me." Walter nodded once before disappearing into the crowd, looking no different from any other elderly man walking through the airport. No one could have guessed he was carrying the final chapter of a story that had begun more than 50 years earlier. The drive was silent. As the sun settled beyond the horizon, Walter turned onto a quiet residential street lined with old oak trees and modest homes glowing with warm porch lights. He parked across from a small white house and sat behind the steering wheel for several long minutes. Then, taking one slow breath, he stepped outside. The wooden box felt strangely light as he carried it toward the front porch. He carefully placed it beside the door. On top rested the cream-colored envelope bearing his daughter's name in his own careful handwriting. Walter looked at the door one last time before pressing the doorbell. Ding, Walter waited. The door opened. He could not bring himself to look, so he turned and began to walk away. A few moments later, the front door opened. A woman glanced down, puzzled by the unexpected package. She gently lifted the envelope and noticed the old wooden box beneath it. Curious, she carried both inside and closed the door. Walter had almost reached the end of the walkway when he heard nothing but silence behind him. He kept walking. Inside the house, the woman slowly opened the box. One by one, she lifted each keepsake into the fading light. The silver pilot wings, the Medal of Honor, the faded black and white photographs, the little wooden airplane. Finally, she unfolded the letter resting beneath them all. As her eyes moved across the page, her expression slowly changed. Confusion became disbelief. Disbelief became tears. Her hands began to tremble. The final lines blurred before her eyes. "I am sorry I came home too late. Not a single day passed that I did not love you. If you are reading this, then I finally found the courage to knock." She lowered the letter. For one frozen moment, the entire world seemed to stand still. Then she looked toward the front door. Without another thought, she ran. The door flew open into the quiet evening as she hurried onto the porch, her eyes searching beyond the gate. The screen faded to black before she spoke a single word. Several weeks later, Claire Morgan found a small envelope waiting in her mailbox after returning home from another flight. Inside was a single photograph. Walter stood smiling beside his daughter. Around them were children and grandchildren gathered close together. The old wooden box rested open at the center of the table, no longer carrying one man's memories alone, but belonging at last to the family it had protected for a lifetime. On the back of the photograph, written in careful handwriting, was a single sentence. "Thank you for reminding an old pilot that coming home is never about the distance. It is only about finding the courage to knock."